All right, we are at time, so I will give this
Okay.
to John and Sean to do what they need to do.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening to some of you. Good morning to others. I'm John, Head of Design Recruiting at TDA, and welcome to our latest Future of Design Forum, first one of 2023. Today we'll be discussing some of the challenges of leadership in the design business, and really, aimed at those of you who want to develop professionally and those who want to get the best out of their teams. Andrew, Vanessa, and William will be really offering. Oh, sorry. Did someone ask a question?
Nah, I think people just need to be on mute.
Yeah, so we'll be offering some ways and strategies to help navigate some of those challenges, obviously, to produce some positive outcomes. We're very privileged today to have three key speakers with us: Andrew, Vanessa, and William. Andrew LaMonica has been part of this forum for a long time, and he's an award-winning design leader with 20+ years of experience in solving complex business challenges. He's held design leadership positions at GE, as well as the Olympics, Google, Bloomberg, LinkedIn, Target, MTV. In fact, there's not many places where Andrew hasn't, worked. He's been mentioned in publications like CNBC, Wall Street Journal. He's also a licensed executive coach, and really specializes in organizational performance and development. He's given keynote speeches at places like NYU Stern and Harvard Business School. So welcome, Andrew. Good to see you again.
Thank you very much.
Vanessa, also a design leader, advocates using design thinking principles to create viable solutions for businesses. Her experience ranges across lots of different types of companies, international global corporations, all the way down to kind of smaller startups. And she's worked at places like Rightmove and Vodafone. Currently, Vanessa is head of UX at Kazoo. Welcome, Vanessa. William Barraclough is our third design leader. William is passionate about developing teams, creating products that help audiences and grow businesses. In his 20+ years, he's held leadership positions at Red Ventures, Zoopla, Tide. He's currently leading global product design at William Hill in the UK. So welcome, William.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to you all. Andrew, I'm going to hand over to you for a second. It'd be good to sort of get just a quick sort of summary of some of the issues that we'll be discussing today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. And a big thanks to you all for showing up to this. It's a really interesting conversation where we're talking about kind of like the behavior stuff that a lot of design leaders go through. And appreciate John and Sean for actually giving this topic a platform that we could all kind of get together and chat about it. So aside from my day job of being a design exec, I also do a lot of developmental work with design leaders. And last year was an interesting year. Pretty challenging for a lot of people. Like I should say the last couple of years have been pretty challenging for the design industry writ large. But one of the things I noticed, there were a lot of themes coming up, working with leaders and their teams. And we're going to talk about a couple of them. Like four big ones, which we're going to chat about. First one is limiting beliefs. The next one is confidence. One I affectionately call asshole boss. And the last one is false narratives. So like this isn't like an exhaustive or definitive list, but these were kind of like the big things that kind of kept on coming up with leaders. So we're gonna chat a little bit about them, like where they come from and some strategies on how to mitigate them. The intention of today is to really kind of just normalize these things that are coming up. We got a lot of pretty awesome design leaders to kind of chat about this, but I think it's really great to offer clarity on these behaviors and these things, and also ways that we can support each other. So that's kind of where we are. Also, I want to talk about too, like I'm not a therapist and I don't play one on the internet. So like these are some deep issues. So we're going to talk about them, how these kind of show up in the workspace and some things to do. So that's the high level of what we're going to talk about for the next 30-40 minutes.
Andrew, how did Well, first of all, it'd be good to know how you kind of got into doing things like this, and how this particular body of work around leadership challenges came about.
Oh, it's a really good question. The short answer to that is when I got my first executive role, I was at GE. GE's like, been around for a long time, and it's like leadership is actually one of the core pillars at work. So this is part of my executive training, where it's like you really understand like the behaviors of people and how to lead people in really thoughtful ways. And there's a very like there's very much a psychological approach to how you work with people and get large group of people do things. And this is just something that I was like, oh wow, this is great. And I see a lot of familiar names on this call, and just like as a leader, like we all know that like most of our problems aren't design problems, they're people problems. Just like it's not really like how to build a design system. We know how to do that. It's like how do you navigate people, and how do you get teams to perform great, or how do you get a direct report to kind of get unstuck with where they are. So that's kind of where this came from, and I just continued to develop that since there. I got licensed in this. Like I have a couple hundred hours of clinical training in this, and it actually makes me do my day job better. So that's where a lot of this comes from. So that's the short answer to where this came from.
Okay, great. Well, should we kick things off then, Andrew? I know that the first
Sure.
The first piece you want to really tackle is limiting beliefs. Can you kind of define that term for the group here?
Yeah, this was a big one that came up a lot last year. It's this idea that like self-doubt has destroyed more careers than anything else. Like diagnostically, it's a state of mind or belief about yourself that restricts you in some way. Usually it kind of originates as being a defense mechanism. It's something that actually protected you at some point, usually in your childhood. But here's the thing about these beliefs when you go through them, that like unless you deal with them, they tend to get bigger and deeper. So that's why this was one of the important ones, which I wanted to chat about a bit. So what does this look like? When you start like saying to yourself, or when you start hearing language with your team, like, I should be further along in my career by now, or I should have a new job by now, which was one that we're hearing a lot lately, or the work should be perfect. This person is doing better than I am. That's kind of where this comes up. One of the things to be aware of is the language of should. When you start hearing like things should be different, or that's usually a trigger that it's a form of a limiting belief. So here are some things that are helpful. Now, first of all, how you talk to yourself matters. If you start saying to yourself like, I should have a job by now, or I should be promoted by now, like you start believing that. So, and I'm sure, John, you might have some thoughts about this, but like how you talk to your inner voices actually will help you in a lot of different ways. Something else that's usually helpful is using the word yet. Like, I haven't gotten a new job yet. It's a simple thing to just kind of add to the dialogue that you're having, whether it's with yourself or with your direct reports. What's really good about yet is that it's about growth mindset. It's about you getting better and developing. It signals progress in your mind. It's like, I'm not ready for this role yet, and it starts you to develop that, you are a work in progress and you can get better. Something else that's really helpful, like as a framework on dealing with limiting beliefs, is if you find yourself saying these things, in what ways can you turn your limiting belief into an unlimited belief or an empowering belief? I'm not ready for the promotion yet. Like, okay, ask yourself, what would happen if you were ready for that role? The mind is really interesting, is that when you frame things that way as an empowering belief, you start figuring out ways on how to accomplish it. And your brain starts thinking, and your subconscious works really well in things like this. Something that's also really helpful is to replace it with something believable. Like if you're talking to a direct report who's maybe not comfortable public speaking, like they're not immediately going to turn into Beyonce. So like, what are the more believable things that you could do? Like, if you're not comfortable public speaking, all right, why don't you lead a lunch and learn for the team? Like, show them how to do it. Start really small with things like that, and you could say that you're getting better at public speaking every day. Like, you're a work in progress, you're growing. Another thing that's really good is evidence. So when you document and record your accomplishments, whether it's like in a journal, it's on your phone, I have mine on my phone, looking at factual evidence actually helps you break the limiting beliefs that you might have. And when those limiting beliefs creep up, you could point to the evidence and you could say, hey, look, I'm growing and I'm getting better at what I'm doing. So that was kind of like a short version of like, this is what it is. This is what it sounds like. And here are some things that you can do. John, what's your perspective before we kick it to our peers?
Yeah, pretty broad. You know, I looked at some stats online. You know, 70% of people in a leadership position have experienced something called imposter syndrome. It's a phrase I think that we're all sort of fairly familiar with. And really that's, you know, the experience of feeling like a fraud or doubting your abilities to fulfill the responsibilities of your role. So it's not uncommon at all. You know, I think everyone on this call may have experienced it at some point. You know, the way that I deal with things like that is, you know, I'll take a step back and really assess my mindset. Sometimes, you know, your mindset can what's the word I'm looking for? Can elicit certain feelings about or doubting your abilities. Once I've established, you know, that perhaps it's the way that I'm looking at things, I choose the new lens to look through that, to give me some clarity and to see the bigger picture and kind of break things down. So that's, you know, that's kind of it's a very general take on it.
Cool. Vanessa, William, your thoughts? Vanessa, why don't you go first?
Shall I go first? Yeah, so similar to you, Andrew, I think it's gathering that evidence. So one of my old managers said, every time you see something on Slack where someone's basically kind of praised you, take a screenshot and put it in a folder. So I have a folder on my desktop, which just has everything where someone said something really good about myself. And I think another thing is really just reminding yourself, why are you here? You've been hired for a reason. You have this skill, and just really reminding yourself of people believe in you. You've been hired, you're getting paid for this. So you know, believe in yourself ultimately. And I think going back to that evidence piece, it's really like talking to your peers or people that you work with. Am I meeting the expectations that everyone else has for me? If I'm not, then what do I need to do to meet those expectations? And then just having that evidence and that feedback, you're able to kind of action it, and you're able to actually do something about it and feel a bit more empowered. So William, what do you think?
I'm glad I'm not the only one that does exactly what you described. So yeah, I mean, people are kind enough to share things on LinkedIn. It's one of the few things I really like about LinkedIn, and you can get that sort of verbatim and feedback. And there are days when, yeah, you kind of need to see that stuff and be kind to yourself to remind you that, yeah, you did that thing and that was really good, because there are plenty of things around you that you can't control. So what can you control? You can control how you respond to things, and look within that sort of domain. And I couldn't agree more with, you got hired to do that job. And as I walked into a more recent job over the last 9 months, it was slightly terrifying and scary. And I went with an exit for my last place. It wasn't a decision. It was something we came to an agreement on. But I was really proud of some of the steps that I had achieved in that. So I can look back that not everything needed to be perfect. You know, those are the things that when you're a craft designer, you kind of really index highly. I was a UI designer by trade. I'd want it to be that 99.9% perfect detail. I can't do that. I'm a regular human being mostly. So that little bit of be kind to yourself. Remember that as long as there is more that is better than is bad or good, or you're learning on the journey, then so be it. I think, you know, try to be good to yourself, try to be good to the others around you, and learn and put yourself. I like to put myself out of my comfort zone. These sort of sessions like this right now, you know, I woke up 3 a.m. thinking about it, thinking, damn, that's going to be cool. Slightly freaked out, but it's going to be good. I did that with mountain biking recently. It ended like this. Doesn't always work, but I'll be back.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. So the next thing we're going to chat about is confidence. Like, this is something that comes up a lot, and not just with leaders, but also like people starting out in middle management. So confidence is, I mean, at a very simplistic level, it's just trusting yourself. It's the unshakable trust in your abilities that you can meet any challenge. Now, this diagnostically, this shows up as like having faith or trust in your abilities, that you're emotionally secure, and that you can meet challenges successfully and in a thoughtful way. Now, the lack of confidence, it shows up when you hear or see things that's like, I'm no good at X, or I'll be successful when, or I'm not ready for Y. So because this is such a prominent issue in our industry, this is another one where the negative language, like how you talk to yourself, really shows up. Something to be aware of is that confidence is an output. It's the result of something. One of the ways, like, you can't just like say I'm going to be more confident with things, it just never works. But when you start working in self-acceptance, confidence becomes an output of that. Like when you're accepting yourself, like what your capabilities are and what you can do, and you're aware of your expertise, the confidence comes from that. So that's something just to keep in mind on that aspect. I see a lot of managers work with their teams being like, oh, just be more confident. And like, it's not something that like you can add to cart. It's not like Amazon. But when you start working with them to accept who they are and understand, be aware of what their expertise is, the confidence comes out of that. Something else that is helpful with this is that you may hear language where I will have more confidence when it's usually like an external condition, like I get a promotion or I get a praise. So one of the things that's really helpful in developing is how can you change those external conditions to internal conditions? Like when X happens, I'll be ready. Or when you hear that with your teams, like it's always some external thing. So the helpful reminder is like, what are the internal things? What are the things that you have control over? William said this earlier, like, you can't control other things. You can only control what you do. It's like, what are the things that you can control over that will tell you that you will be better? Something else that you can do is, what's the smallest version of success? Like, really kind of figure that out, make it easy for yourself. Like, you want to go like exercise in the morning, just make sure your clothes and your sneakers are by the bed. Like, remove obstacles, make it easy for you. Like, you want to get better at public speaking. Maybe you're not doing a lunch and learn. Maybe you're just telling a joke over lunch. Something I see a lot with high performers or people who self-identify as high performers is they want to be 100% perfect. They want the work to be flawless before they show it to a leader. So it's your job as a leader to say like, hey, I know you want to give me 100% on this one. I just need 75% perfect. Just give them that limitation, like lower the bar with them, give them the smallest version of that so they become more confident in what they're presenting to you. A piece of language that I use a lot is, hey, give me a bad version of what your strategy is. Like, I just need thoughts on a paper. I need a point of view. Just give me this give me a bad version of what this is. And as a leader, it's really important for you to reward behavior when they do these things. So if confidence is an issue, and this is the thing that you're trying to help them develop, when they do those little things, when they believe in themselves a little bit more, when they are understanding and more self-aware of what they're doing, reward that behavior. Be like, hey, it's a really good job when you did that. Something else that comes up a lot too is people set these unrealistic deadlines where it will get better when, quote unquote, like when I have more time or when I have more experience or when I manage more people and have a bigger team. One of the challenges with this one is when never happens. You just get better at handling the difficult things or handling the challenge. So when you step outside your comfort zone a little bit, and when you start realizing that I'm just trying to get a little bit better every day, the confidence slowly builds. Now, another thing is, and this is actually really common with high-performing athletes, same thing with high-performing leaders, is you use something that's called the LeBron James voice, or Dobby the House Elf for my Harry Potter heads out there. So LeBron James talks to himself in the third person. Like I use that language because if you listen to like press conferences, you'll hear it. You'll hear LeBron James say something like, LeBron James is going to work harder than anybody on the court. It's not his ego talking. There's actually neuroscience behind this one, is that when you talk to yourself in the third person, you are talking to yourself like a best friend. you are stepping outside of your story and you're distancing yourself from the emotion or the challenging feelings that you're having about that. And the cool thing is you're also kinder to yourself. You're more empathetic. So that third person thing is actually pretty good. Some interesting things that happen with this one, and the research behind this is that women and people of color tend to be harder on yourself when they're, so this idea of being aware that confidence is a thing that you need to be more thoughtful about and cautious about, just give yourself a break. Just cut yourself a little bit more slack than you normally would. It's okay. Like, everyone's going through these challenges, but the more you are aware of yourself and the more that you are taking a thoughtful approach, the confidence builds. So John, any thoughts that you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I in situations where I don't feel particularly confident, I will often pretend that I am until I can get that right. I think people can recognize confidence.
Sure.
I think a lack of confidence can be quite infectious, and therefore quite debilitating in business. So to have that sort of front or you know, very real and genuine confidence, I think is so important, and whatever we can do to improve that, I think is really important.
Okay. Vanessa, what would you like to add?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's important to surround yourself with people who just like hype you up, just to give you that confidence. I think I struggled a lot with confidence in my kind of career, and I think there's two things that I've done. One is really anchor myself in my craft, so I know I'm good at my craft. I know I'm good at as a designer, and that's what gives me confidence. So I really lean into that. And then the other thing is just stop over analyzing. So I will go through every single scenario and around the houses. And basically, I've just like, stop doing that. Just say yes, just do it. I'll think about it later. So once you've said yes and you've committed to it, you kind of have to do it. Yeah, and the more you do these things and the more success you comes out of it, the more confident you become, because you're like, oh, I did this thing. I didn't think I could do it. I did it, and I got really good feedback. So it's doing more of the things that take you out of that your comfort zone and not thinking too much about it. So yeah. Will,
I love that, having a hype squad. I'm going to make a note of that. That's awesome. Awesome. William, what were you going to add, man?
Yeah, it's cool. Definitely bring the hype for sure. I was trying to think. I think it's, yeah, again, it's working through. Sorry, my brain's just gone blank.
It's all good.
Too much about the hype. As you said, Vanessa, there are things, you know, it's that craft thing. I'm pretty competent in what I know I'm really strong at. And that confidence can come when you walk into a room and you know the subject, that I can talk about that thing. But I remember having a boss, Gavin. I used to be a commercials editor. I used to make ads. And you'd spend a lot of time with creatives behind you. So you'd be trying to cut an ad and do these things, move these frames, do that stuff. But you'd have to have a conversation, dialogue, because it's a relationship. And I was always amazed by Gavin, who was good, 15 years older than me, his ability to talk to anybody. We'd be in the pubs in Soho and he could just talk to, this was remarkable. I was quite quiet at this point. This is quite a while ago for me. And I just like, well, how do you do that? You know, it's not just a beer. He would do it even before he'd had a beer. And it said, just talk. People want to talk about themselves. So let them talk about themselves. Give them an opportunity to be heard and to be listened. So I think that then you can start a conversation that brings the confidence, because they nearly engage you in the conversation. And then I use the same approach when I started to do more talks, or to I suppose, move from being an IC to a leader, was, well, what are the problems? How can I help you unblock this thing? What are the things? I'm going to go see what I can do about this. And, you know, classic, don't ask for forgiveness, you know, just go and do it. You know, like Nike says, just I like your sneaker analogy. You know, the hard bit is getting your foot out the door. So just stick your foot out the door, stick the sneaker on, go and try it. What's the worst that can happen? I say this a lot to like the team. It's not like you're in the playground and someone's going to punch you or do those things that are terrifying when you're at school. You know, I think the stuff my 12-year-old is going through at secondary school is way scarier than the stuff I have to deal with being a grown up in a corporate environment. So what's the worst? I'm not a doctor. No one's going to die because of hopefully a decision I made. People might get pissed off, might not like some of the stuff, but I'll try and rationalize it. So I think that those are the things that kind of where I'm at on that.
Awesome. Thank you. Those are great additions to this. So the next one is asshole boss or asshole colleague or asshole stakeholder. And that's an affectionate title. So here's the thing with asshole boss. People are making the best decisions with the information that they have. Like that's what this is. Like how this presents itself is usually something like, Andrew is such an ass. Now, the thing with this one is that, like, if you notice, I'm not talking about the actual asshole. I'm talking about how you're responding to the asshole. And I do this for two reasons. As we mentioned earlier, like, you can't fix other people. You can only fix how you react to difficult people or how your team reacts to difficult people. That's the only thing you do. Now, for those of you taking notes, you want to coach the person, not the problem. So you want to work with the individual, if that's you or if that's your direct report. Like, you can't fix the dynamic between, your direct report and the asshole, and you definitely can't fix the asshole. And the other thing is 9 out of 10 times, the problem's you. I'm going to pause for dramatic effect, but what's going on there is that something that person is doing is triggering you in a way that you want to dismiss them or negate them. That's like the behavioral psychology behind what's going on with this thing. Now, here's frameworks that can help when you're dealing with difficult people. Empathy is probably the way to go on this one, and everybody on this call should be really good with that. The challenge with this is that, like, anyone could be an asshole. All you need is a bad reason. All you need is like a bad day and a good reason. My partner was traveling for work. I got a crap night's sleep because my 2 kids were both sick, and I was just a jerk the next day. And I fully admit that. Everyone has bad days. Get a good reason, you're gonna be an asshole. The other thing to keep in mind is that you're not that important. People don't wake up in the morning, put on their clothes and say, you know what, I'm going to make Andrew's life difficult today. They don't do that. I was working with an executive who's like, the president sat behind me in that meeting just to stifle my opinion. I'm like, dude, there were no other seats in the meeting room. And I can guarantee you are not even on the president's radar. But like, just acknowledge and take a step back and be like, all right, I'm probably not that important. Now, here's the thing. You have to do the self-work. You have to put the time in on what is it that this person is doing that's triggering you. Now, when you understand what the trigger is, 2 things happen, which are pretty cool. One, it actually affects you less. The research and studies behind this are great. Like, when you know, like, what is the thing that's bothering you, it bothers you less in intensity and duration. And the second thing that's really good is that once you understand that trigger is, you can work on addressing it. Because odds are, it's not this one person that you're responding to. It's a behavior that a lot of people do that you respond to on a lot of different levels. So if you understand that trigger, if you kind of solve that thing, you're actually solving a lot of other problems. Now, another thing you do, this is a bonus thing on trying to fix, more of like a Jedi master technique. It's that you spend some time to understand the fulfillment. Like, what is this person getting out of behaving this way? So like narcissists make it about themselves because they have this like self-loathingly insecure thing going on. Passive aggressive people, they're that way because they're trying to gain control. They may not have it in their home life, so they try to get it in their work life. People who pick fights are like, they kind of need attention, and they feel that negative attention is better than no attention at all. And they're like, or like people who gossip, they have this misguided understanding that that's a way to like connect with people, or sometimes it's like masking their own bad behavior. So like when you understand the fulfillment, like what this person is getting out of this, it makes it a whole lot easier. There's one lawyer I had to work with a lot. It was super difficult. Like he always had to talk and just kind of dominate the conversation. I took some time to figure out, okay, 1, he's feeling like he's not being heard. And 2, the dude just likes to talk. So whenever I had meetings with him, I was like, first 5 minutes of the meeting was like, dude, I want to know everything that's going on with you. How's it really good? And he would just talk. And usually on the 5-minute mark, I was like, dude, I would love to talk with you more, but we need to get to the work. So is that okay? And conversation just got a whole lot easier after that. So like, this is some ideas. You do the self work, understand what the triggers are, and asshole boss as a pathology kind of goes away. Let me take a break for a second. John, what are your thoughts?
I'm very fortunate not to have an asshole boss currently, but I have had them in the past, and there's a few things that I did to change the way that I felt about my asshole boss. Number one was to recognize that they might be having a bad day. They've got their own issues to deal with, whether that's self-loathing, whether that's just a crap personal life. I need to recognize that I can't control them or change them. But the way that I reacted to them, I can affect that. I established something called the rhythm method. I think, sometimes bosses will, especially asshole bosses, they'll ping you hundreds of questions over an hour and expect immediate responses. And if you give them immediate responses, all you're doing is reinforcing that behavior. Kind of classical conditioning, right? So I would start to delay my responses, or I would over communicate on a specific project. Maybe we're working on something together, and over communication on every tiny item can really diffuse asshole boss. So there's a couple of strategies there that I've used in the past to negate the effect that asshole boss would have on my kind of daily life.
Oh, this is a really good one. Venessa, thoughts?
Yeah, so I did laugh when you said that it's kind of your fault and how you react. So I'll tell you a quick story time. So I previously had a bit of an asshole boss and decided to leave. And then I had an exit interview with HR. And I then proceeded to complain about this boss. And she basically said, well, did you set the expectation of what you wanted for your boss? And I was like, no. And she was like, well, it's your fault then. And I was low-key triggered, I'm not gonna lie. But upon reflection, I actually agree with her. So I think one of the first things is when you first have a boss and you're like, I'm not really gelling with this person, is to really set those expectations. What do you expect from this person to give you? And what are their expectations of you? So then you start on a level playing field. I think the other thing is just taking control of the situation. So coming to one-to-ones prepared, have an agenda, write notes down, really take control of the situation as much as possible. So it's not just, it ends up being a conversation. If you just come to a one-to-one, not prepared, it's like, so what do you want to talk about? And then it becomes like this unstructured conversation, and you haven't got from it what you wanted. Another thing that I use quite a bit is I ask questions. I give them scenarios and kind of say, well, how would you respond to this? So use them as more of an advisory type person. I think it is really important to also have mentors and other people that you speak to. So your boss is not that one person that you're speaking to about career progression or other kind of scenarios that you're dealing with. Yeah.
William, thoughts?
Yeah. So I think it's all had those a-hole bosses, unfortunately, and I've been guilty of being accused of being that in the past. So let me take a slightly different stance where somebody thought I was the a-hole boss, and it was a new team that I'd inherited and start up. So the sort of culture that's imbued within that. Nobody wants to feel that like people don't like them. It's a natural sort of tendency, but over the space of like a month or so, there are things that were put in place. And I started to get communications and emails from one of the designers that thought I was the a-hole boss. And what I did was just to try to empathize, to understand where he was coming from and to look from the lens of what I guess my boss was challenging me. And he was cool, but I didn't really understand the discipline as such. So me being that sort of filter through, but I think by giving him the space to sort of listen, I went from him calling me a petulant child to a place where he could kind of understand where I was sort of coming from. But it took a couple of beers, it took time together in the space for a month and a half, and it resulted in him actually needing to take a bit of a break from the business for his own personal issues. But by giving him that space, and when he came back about 3 months later and we managed his workload to ease him back into it, he saw that I was an advocate and supporter. I wasn't trying to be a dick about it, but there are things for as leadership you have to set. We have to do these things, or we have to achieve these goals. By all means, you don't want to micromanage and tell people what to do, and you want to create autonomy. But there are things, outcomes that have to be achieved. So okay, OKRs and KPIs. So I think that's a slightly different stance for me with the a-hole boss that I had in the past, and I ended up leaving because I think sometimes people are just a-holes. Sorry, and I kind of agree. You have to look back in yourself. And what I tried to do to emphasize with that boss was to bring them on the journey, to understand, as Venessa said, to set some sort of boundaries and understanding what your needs are. But I found that if I brought him on the journey, it worked to a point, so that he could feel that he was suitably empowered, and it wasn't just the command and control sort of structure of do this, do that. Why haven't you done that? Don't like you, or don't get it. And that kind of helped. But with my new boss that I've got now, it's been amazing because it's an equal relationship. And I think that's the important bit, is how do you balance that relationship? You know, think about with your children, with your peers, with your wives, girlfriend, boyfriend, husbands. It's about equilibrium, and it's that respect. So how can you drive an equal and mutual respect? And as you said at the beginning, Vanessa, you got hired, you were here, you're at the table. You were hired for a point. It wasn't for them to talk down to you. So I think that respect is inherent. And if you can't get to that place, then I don't think you don't have to stay.
I think it's really a thoughtful point that you brought up. Thank you. And something consistent with both of you I heard was, meeting other people where they are and keeping those lines of communication open, and just being really clear about what your needs are and what the expectations are and what you're seeing from other people. I think those are really thoughtful approaches to dealing with the asshole boss. So the last one we're going to talk about is false narratives. Now, this one was really interesting coming out of last year, is that a lot of leaders were going through this. And false narratives, it's the stories we tell ourselves. It's usually based on like incomplete or inaccurate information, but your mind is trying to find meaning or make sense. So it makes up the story, which might not be true. So what does that look like? Usually this is something like, I hate my job and I'll never find another one. Or everyone hates me, or I'm getting nowhere with this project, where it's like people are creating these stories, which may or may not be true. Now, some frameworks that can help with this. First, let me start with what not to do. So like you may get a direct report, it'll be like, I suck, or I'm awful at this project. Most people will do, of course you don't suck, you're awesome. Don't do that. Here's why. Because like when you say something like that, you're actually challenging their worldview. You're basically saying like your point of view is wrong and how you feel because of it is wrong. Like that's not helpful. Secondly, the common thing that happens when someone's worldview gets challenged is that they double down and get entrenched in their beliefs. It's like, yes, I really do suck, and let me count the ways. You can just take a look at today's political climate. You'll see all this stuff in action. So something that you could do is this another one where, starting with empathy is really helpful. Some language I get a ton of mileage out of is, I'm sorry to hear that. That must be really hard for you. What you're doing when you say that is that, you are hearing them and you're validating. Okay, and those are two core components of any behavioral tendencies. Like people want to be heard and they want to be validated. Now, I mean, you agree with them, but just validate it. Okay, you're going through this. The next thing you want to do is you want to get them away from like ruminating and catastrophic thinking. You could do that by saying things like, well, I'm sure that you could think of one thing that doesn't suck about you, or I'm sure you could find one part about this project that's not being destroyed. And give them a moment, like really take a pause and think about that. You ask them a logical question and, they're going to answer. It's a very rational thing to phrase to someone, and the brain is going to want to give a rational answer. Okay. Usually they'll start listing things. When you give them enough time and you don't fill the silence, they'll be like, okay, maybe these two parts don't suck. But if they're still struggling, obviously be prepared with a few things to get them started. Once you get them out of catastrophic thinking, you want to get them to start generating options. Be like, okay, cool. What are some things that don't suck? What are some things that you could do about that? That's actually a piece of language I use a lot. Be like, okay, so you've established some things that don't suck. What are you going to do about that? You want to empower them and give them control. Another thing leaders can do really easily: what support do you need? Like, how can I help you? How can I help you navigate this challenging time, or get you developmental opportunities, or support with this project so it sucks less? Those are some things you could do. And like false narratives in general, they're running pretty rampant in the industry now, like with all the layoffs going on, and people are creating all sorts of stories about what's going on. Like, really take a step out of that. John, your thoughts, please.
I have a great example of false narrative from something that happened in the 80s and 90s at Kodak. The CEO at the time had such a belief in this false narrative, and of course it trickled down across the organization, and that was that celluloid film was going to be around forever. I think at the time Kodak had like 85% market share. They also employed a guy who invented the first digital camera, but the false narrative that was kind of ubiquitous in the organization was so strong, and so many people bought into it that they didn't they didn't go down the digital camera route, and of course that became the next big thing, and Kodak's business shrunk rapidly after that. So that's the a false narrative can really ruin a business. That's why it's so important to want to deal with them correctly.
That's a really good point. Venessa, what would you like to share?
Yeah, I think one thing that I do in my kind of life, but also with my direct reports, is create goals. So make sure you have goals and something that you're moving towards, but also understanding how that fits into the bigger picture of things. So a lot of the time when you're in something, all you can see is what you're in. And actually what you need to do is take a step back and see where you are in relation to everything else, right? And when I'm working with my direct reports, it's always reminding them of the bigger picture and that goal of where they're trying to get to. And another thing that I do with my directs quite a bit is partner with them, is to tell them that they're kind of not alone, and like basically treat it as a UX problem to solve. So it's kind of like, well, what is the problem here? What is the issue, and how can we resolve it? And then what support do you need in order to kind of resolve that? And how can we work through this together? Almost, and also breaking it down into smaller chunks makes it feel a bit more manageable, especially for direct reports who are getting overwhelmed. I do it in myself as well. And then reporting back on those, right? So trying to make it a bit more logical, a bit more based in evidence, so that you have something that you can refer to and you can see the progress. So that's kind of how I tackle that, as well as hype people and therapy. But
awesome. William, any closing thoughts on this one?
Yeah, very similar. I think it's one of the bits I really enjoy. Probably most of my role is coaching as more junior designers, or to give people who are looking for a footstep into the industry, or maybe a lateral move. How do you do that? And a lot of them are really concerned about the things, because especially there's so much hype around, especially people who are not really in the industry, but seem to put a lot of hype out on LinkedIn, but they seem to know everything. But you look at the career and it's just fake. So that creates those false narratives. So the reality is giving people that space to say, well, actually, here are the things that are real, not career matrices and things, but here are the growth things. Here are the soft behaviors, because you'll learn the craft. You can learn Figma, they can learn all those other bits and pieces, but learning and evolving some level of confidence, that ability to believe in your own self and to move that. So the way we've done that a lot in our team, the last couple of teams I've looked after, is present those opportunities through different rituals in the team, so they become behaviors. So we have not crits, but like demo sessions, and demo sessions can be anything that you bring. So it could be a piece of work, it could be we've been to an event, we're talking about this thing, and we're just demoing and demonstrating our knowledge. And in the team that I've recently looking after, the quality of the presentation, the confidence back to the team from those that were quite insular to now we'll talk in a session, especially a Zoom thing. It's really hard. People would put a hand up, talk. They're now having voice, and it's amazing to see that over a short space of time. I think you only need to take, I read something recently where I think it takes like 60 days, 70 days, 80 days or something to change some behaviors, but you've got to believe and then to form around that. And if you can do that, you can bring a group of people, not just the individual. So I think you can act at the individual, but then you can form those behaviors as a team. And that's the bit that I really enjoy, is when you bring a whole team along. It's hard, but it can certainly be done. And we see some amazing teams out there today doing some incredible stuff. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. So I wanted to kind of just wrap this up with a nice bow. Some general takeaways to share is that, like, so a lot of these insights were distilled from over 200 sessions with design leaders last year. The interesting thing was, like, these behavioral challenges, like, they're not targeted to a specific group. Like, there isn't a type of person, there isn't a particular level. Like, anyone can go through these things, and most people do. Something else is to be aware of, and this is a theme with all four of those challenges, is like, it's not the problem, it's how you relate to the problem. And just that simple reframing about, like, when your direct reports come to you with a challenge, be like, okay, like, how are you relating to this particular challenge? Or even if you're working with yourself, you're like, all right, what is it about this person that's triggering me? Like, really think about how you're relating to that thing. Now, another thing is, anecdotally, that people who have a therapist or a mental health practitioner that they see regularly are more self-aware, and they notice the triggers and patterns better. It's less intense in duration and it's shorter. So, like, I'm a big fan of that. I mean, I think everybody should have a good therapist, a good person to talk to. So that's some notes for you there. Vanessa talked about this earlier, is that people who have support systems do better. Like, when they have the support group in place, they actually, whether it's a manager, ERG groups, mentors, coaches, psychologically safe teams, or just your hype squad, whatever it is, those support systems actually support you, and you're able to navigate these challenges better. Another thing is that, and I believe this to be true, is that you're the sum of the 5 people you spend most time with. So if you're around people who are toxic, who are challenging, who are just having a tough time with life, you're going to be toxic. You're going to be challenged. You're going to just have a tough time. But if you put yourself around people who are self-aware, well-adjusted, driven in their career, you're going to become self-aware, driven, better off in your career. And the last thing, the note that I'd like to leave everybody with is be kind. Like, you don't know what other people are going through. Especially, like, whether it's your colleagues, your peers, your manager, or whatever, just be kind. And be kind to that person you see in the mirror. Like, none of this shit's easy. Like, none of this is going to be solved in a 45-minute Zoom session, or even a couple sessions with therapists, but you put the time in, and it does get better every time you go through this. So, give yourself a break and keep at it.